Okay, so we're into lesson 3. Now in this lesson, what we're going to do is the main effect. We're going to add yellowy tones into the right hand side of this woman. We're going to add the reddy tones into the left hand side of the woman. So let's jump straight into Photoshop where we left off. And again, as always, keep our document nice and tidy. What I'm just going to do is select all the layers that are applied to the woman, all these adjustment layers and the woman layer. I'm just going to create a new group and call this layer woman. So we've got a nice tidy document. We've got a help layers, woman and the lights, so we can see what we're doing nice and clear. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new group, and I'm just going to call this group yellow light. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually apply all the yellowy adjustments to this group so that they're all separated, so we can edit these individually from anything we've adjusted already in this woman group. But one thing we do want to do is we want to have a layer mask, because currently anything that goes into this yellow group is going to apply to the whole image. So what we're going to do is copy the layer mask from the woman by holding down Alt and clicking on the thumbnail of the layer mask. And we're going to add that to the yellow light group. You can see there we now have the exact same mask as the woman, so anything in this group is going to apply only to the woman. So that's the first step. Now the next step is to perform adjustments. The same way we perform these adjustments to blend in the woman, we're going to perform the exact same adjustments to create these yellowy tones and then the red tones. So first things first, what we actually want to do is turn on our help layers. So we want the color fill and the exposure, and then what we want to do is come into our yellow light and we want to add a selective color adjustment. Now that's in our group, make sure. And now what we want to do is just zoom in. Now we want to create on this right hand side of the woman all these yellowy tones. We want to create like a match almost to these yellowy tones. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust each color individually. So we're going to adjust the cyans, magentas, yellows and blacks in every single color to get a better match on this color on the right hand side. So what you want to do is you want to click and drag these sliders, and you want to look at how it's affecting the woman, and you want to make sure that each one brings you closer to these tones. So it's quite a long process. You can do this with the curves adjustment layer, but I actually much prefer to do it with selective color. I feel like it gives you much more control, but it's your choice on that one. My advice is to use whatever one is best for your current situation. So I'm just going to click and drag these down. So again, you can see the yellowy tones already. Let's turn this off and back on. You can see the yellows are appearing. So let's go into the yellows, and we just want to adjust these out. So click and drag. Now what you're going to find is the actual colors, so red, yellow, green, cyans, blues, magentas, are going to have subtle effects. Then when you're into the whites, neutrals and blacks, you can have a much bigger effect because you're affecting all the whites, all the neutrals and all the blacks, whereas we're just affecting the individual colors up here. So in the yellows, let's have a look. Let's drag these sliders across. So again, you can see already we're better matching this sort of color here, which is our light source. So let's go into the greens. Not much effect. So it's going to depend. Let's turn this off. If there is actual greens in the woman, there is going to be a big effect, obviously. If there's no green colors in the woman, then these are going to be much more subtle. So let's turn this back on. And again, you always want to do this with these help layers on. It's going to help you massively. So let's click and drag. So you can see the greens there isn't very many greens in the woman originally. So this isn't having a big effect. So let's go on to the cyans, and again we're going to notice the same. Good way to see is if you adjust the blacks. So we're just going to leave those. Blues again are going to be the same, but you want to make sure you come in, just double check everything. Very subtle changes here. You want to just make sure that each color is adjusted to your liking. Obviously it depends on the image that you're placing as well. Maybe you have an image with lots of different colors, so this gives you control over all of those colors. So into the magentas. Very subtle each one. And then into the whites. Now we're going to start to have a bigger effect now. So you can see if we go all the way over to the left, that's these really reddy tones, which is good when we were doing this side. But for this current side, the right hand side, that is not what we want. So we want it more on the bluey side. Okay, so let's leave that there. Magenta's up or down. Just going to leave that roughly at 0, that one. The yellows. Just going to bring this up, so add the yellow tones in, and then in the blacks, add up there. Now into the neutrals, so you can see massive effect this time. So in the whites, neutrals and blacks, you're going to want to only create very small movements. You're not going to want to do drastic movements like that. You're going to see a super harsh effect, which is not what we want. So come over, some more reds there, which we don't want, so the opposite, more yellowy. Bring that down, and the actual yellows, we can bring that up slightly to a +1, and in the blacks, let's go down there. And now the neutrals, so cyans, yeah, you can see a massive change there. So look how pink that is. This is 0, let's 0 that out. So if I go over to the right, just +4, we've already got much better match. So the blacks, depending on your image and the highlights and shadows in your image of whites, neutrals and blacks, one of them is going to have the biggest effect. So let's come over here, drag this down slightly. Let's go over to the right. So let's actually add that as 1, and then blacks. Very subtle. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to turn this selective color layer off. That is before, and that is after. So you can see all these colors are very yellow, which better match this light source. So let's turn this off. So now you can see how the woman actually looks, which is very unrealistic, which is okay. We know that this effect isn't the final result. This is just to help us add these yellow tones in. So let's put this selective color off and back on. Now what we want to do is we only want to apply these effects to the right hand side of the woman. So to do that, we've got our layer mask on the group. So what we can do is we can apply a gradient to that layer mask. So let's go color to transparent, so foreground color to transparent. Select black as a foreground color. You see up here we've got black to transparent. And what I want to do is I want to draw over this mask and I want to paint this gradient on. So I don't want these colors to affect anything over here on the left. So I'm going to come from about here. So anything to the left of this click is going to be hidden. And over to the right, I'm going to hold down Shift to make sure this line is kept straight. And I'm just going to come over to about here. And you're going to see there straight away how that has affected our image. We've hidden that effect all on the left here. We've only applied it to the right hand side of the image. So let's turn that off. That is before and that is after. Now let's just zoom out so we can see that as a whole. So that is before and that is after. So I actually think that's quite harsh, that effect. So I'm just going to reduce the opacity down. I'm just going to click and drag to around 80. Let's have a look how that is. So again, before and after. Now we do have our layer mask, don't forget. So if you want to refine this sort of edit, then what you can do is just grab your brush tool and just brush in certain areas. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to select the brush and I'm going to select black. We've got 40% opacity. I'm just going to brush in some of these areas on the inner thigh there where the light isn't going to be hitting the woman. Okay, so let's have a look before and after. All these yellow tones added in. Perfect. Now next what we want to do is actually add the highlights, because this light is super bright. So she would have highlights all on this right hand side or anywhere that's going to catch this light. Now to do that, what we want to do, come into our group, we want to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer, and we want to select colorize on, and we want to just click and drag this slider. Now what we want to do, we want to match the hue, we want to match the saturation, and we want to match the lightness to create what will be our highlights. So you want to kind of create it similar to the light source. We don't want it to be brighter than the light source. Remember, the highlights on your subject should never be brighter than your light source. For example, if you think about the sun, there is never a highlight on a human that is brighter than the actual sun itself. It's just not the way it works. So let's bring this lightness up. Now you can see we're applied to the group. So all the highlights here are only going to be affecting areas that are in this group, which is affected by our layer mask. So perfect. So let's just click and drag the saturation up. You can see we're on the yellows. I'm just going to drag this up a bit more, drag the saturation up a bit more. So we've got some sort of yellowy tones, which is what we want. I'm just going to drag this out of our group so we can see what's actually happening there. That's how bright this actually is. Let's just drag that back into the group. So this is the before and this is the after. Now obviously we don't want that to apply to the whole image, so like we have done in many parts of this tutorial already, this course, we're just going to come up to edit. We're going to fill with our foreground color, which is black. Just click OK there. Now what we want to do is we want to grab our brush tool, and this is going to depend on your image or how you like to work with a brush tool. I'm just going to select 40 and I'm just going to brush in and build up the highlights. You can brush in with a higher opacity and flow and then kind of reduce the highlights down when you reduce the opacity and flow, but this is my preferred method. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to start on this leg just because that's where sort of the main highlights are going to be. I'm just going to select the brush. We're going to go onto our layer mask and select white as the foreground color, which you can change with X on your keyboard. It's going to swap the foreground and background color, which is super handy when you're actually drawing in, you make a mistake, just hit X and undo that mistake. So I'm just going to reduce the brush size. And now what I'm going to do is just brush in these highlights along the edge of this leg. So you can see them coming in, and I'm just going to keep going and keep drawing the highlights in. So along this right side, it's going to be quite a strong effect because it's close to the light source. So let's come up, let's come around the right here. So you can see on the body there, it's very, very strong. And let's come up along the right hand side. Now these areas are already quite bright, so it's not going to have too much of effect, but you want to brush them in. And this is where you can build up multiple highlights. Maybe you want to actually do this on another layer and just do the highlights for the jacket. Maybe you want to do the highlights separate on the body. I'm going to do them all on one layer just to show you guys this effect. So let's brush in across here. I'm just going to actually increase the opacity up to 60. To speed up the process. So draw these all in. Now on the underside, so all in here is going to be much brighter. These are actually facing the light. So you want to draw that in there, you can see, perfect. Across around the front of the thumb. On the underside of this finger, which is currently dark, that's going to be much brighter in the hand here. And let's just draw down. Okay, now you would actually have some highlights on the woman's head here, but again what we have here is we've got this gradient on the group, so we've not got them in there, so we may do these separately. Let's just come down the right hand side first just to make sure we are affecting this. Let's just undo. We're on the layer mask there of the group. We want to be on this layer mask of the hue and saturation adjustment layer, so let's just come in there. Brush all along this foot, along the right hand side. I'm just going to come up the leg again. Right, now let's just zoom out and have a quick look what we have. So this is before and this is after. So you can see the highlights are much better. Now we've got this slight, really bright effect on the right. Now this is from the selection. So when you're making your selection, you actually want to make sure you're just inside when you're cutting out. So for example, I'm just going to show you here. If I just grab the black and I'm going to put the opacity up, I'm just going to brush on here. You can see we're going to reduce that super bright effect. Now for this right hand side, it doesn't actually matter too much because that area is actually in a highlight, but just when you're cutting around your images, it's one to look out for because you may see bright areas and you think, how do I get rid of those? So that could be why. Always refer back to your original selection because remember, we're applying this to that selection. So let's come back in to our hue and saturation highlights layer, grab the brush, and then we want white again. Let's just put the opacity down to around 28 there. Let's do the same for the float. Now this time what I want to do is going to zoom out slightly, and I'm just going to actually draw in these, because now we have a reduced opacity and flow, we can draw a little bit bigger. So let's draw kind of around these areas, or areas that would be receiving those highlights. So like on the body, for example, it would be brighter. So there we go. Around the leg, you can add some brightness in. Just kind of build up your effect. This is how I like to do it. You kind of start with no highlights, with this layer mask completely black, and then you just keep drawing to build up the highlights how you want this effect to look. So that's the highlights on the right. So let's turn this off. So this is the yellow light and the highlights. Let's turn this off. So that's before and that is after. Now it's quite subtle. Again, these effects kind of build up over time. As you build your adjustment layers, you're going to build the effect. It's all these subtle adjustments that help you create a realistic result. So we're going to do the exact same thing, but this time we're going to do it with the reds. So we want to create a new group. We're just going to call this red light. And what I'm going to do is grab the layer mask from the woman and apply it to the red light layer. Sorry, let me just undo that. So hold down Alt, make sure hold down Alt and click and drag to copy. That time I didn't hold down Alt, so I just click and drag this layer mask, so that's why it was removed from the woman. And this time what we want to do is add another selective color adjustment, which is now applied to our group. We want to add our help layers on, so we want to add the color fill and the exposure help layers. And you can see here this time what we want to do is actually turn the yellow lights off, so that's not affecting our image, so we can do the red separate from the yellows. And we want to come in and we want to adjust each individual color like we did for the yellows. Now this time what we're trying to do is actually match these tones, so these like pinky purpley tones. That's what we want to create along this left side of the woman. So with the reds, let's just come in and start dragging away, and you can start to see these tones being affected. Obviously there's lots of red in the image, so we want to just adjust these out. So let's go ahead. That's the red's done. Yellows, I'm doing this quite quick just to show you guys for the sake of this tutorial. You can take as much time as you need doing this. The better the sort of color match, the better the end result. And one thing to remember as well, using these adjustment layers, is you can go back in and change it at any time. And that's kind of what I like to do when I've built up all the effects, is to go in at the end and actually make the changes required if need be. Maybe I'm not happy with part of the image or the end result, but it's a non-destructive workflow like this, so it allows us to go in and to change what we've done. So let's just keep editing away. You can see there's not many cyan and blues, as there wasn't for the yellow adjustment. Let's come in here, you can see that slightly, so let's reduce those down. We don't want blues in there, we want it to be more purpley. And again, more purple there. Too purple. So again, around this area, like on the shoulders and this here, you can see that change. Now the magentas. You can see there, no effect really, because there isn't much magenta in the original image. Now the whites, we're going to start to see some bigger effects. There we go. So you can see straight away that that's much more purple tones in there. Again, that's probably a bit too harsh, so you only want to create subtle adjustments here. It's good. And again, now in the neutrals, there we go. You can see now that's starting to match much better to these colors over here. The magentas, you only want this to be subtle in the neutrals. So again, let's have a look. So that would be yellows. I think we're pretty good there. Let's reduce that back to 0. And in the blacks, again, let's leave that at 0. Now into the blacks, the cyan, so let's adjust that, so better match on the actual black there. +3, yellows. You can see this is affecting mainly the woman's outfit. And again, So you can swap these relative and absolute, whatever one's going to create your best effect. So this one is set to absolute. And we want to just close that out. Actually, before we close that out, I'm just going to show you before and after. So you can see all the colors in the woman are much better matched to this light source over here. So let's turn the help layers off and see how that actually looks. Again, that doesn't look good when you look at it as a whole, but we're going to do the same thing. We're going to apply a gradient to our layer mask to better improve this blend. So with the selective color selected, let's come and grab the gradient tool. We want to select black as the foreground color. You can see we've got black to transparent selected up here. And this time, I don't want any of the reds to affect kind of this kind of, let's say, the arm up here too much and the right leg. So I'm going to select the gradient from about here and I'm going to click. So anything to the right of that click isn't going to be displayed. And what I'm going to do is just bring this over to around here. And I want it to have quite a heavy effect on the hand. So there we go. Now that looks quite subtle. Let's have a look. So that's before and that is after. That is before and that is after. I'm actually going to undo that and I'm actually going to let this affect more of the image. So let's just fill our layer mask with black again. So I'm just going to come up and do that via edit, fill, and fill with foreground color, which is black. So hide it again. And this time, sorry, I'm just going to invert that. We wanted that to be white. So let's hit Command or Control and I. And that's going to invert the selection there. And let's just click on the icon, grab the gradient, and I'm just going to move further over to the right this time and drag that in. So let's have a look. Okay, that is before and that is after. So again, we've got these yellow tones coming through. So we have our layer mask here. So if we wanted to hide that effect anywhere, we can come up. Let's just set this to 40, our opacity, and the flow to 40. Let's increase the brush slightly. We've got black as our foreground color. I'm just going to reduce it on this jacket, or the jumper, should I say. Just undo a little bit. You can select X to change the colors, draw back in. Subtle. Okay, so again, that is after. Looking good. So now we want to do the same effect. We actually want to add the highlights in. So what I'm going to do this time is I am going to add another hue and saturation adjustment. We're going to select this to colorize. You can see there the lightness needs to go up straight away, and then maybe the saturation there to actually have some reds in. Maybe put the lightness up a touch more. Saturation maybe slightly down. And this color is basically trying to match this light source. So there we go. That's looking pretty good. What we're going to do is we're going to fill this with black. So let's just do that. Alt and backspace to fill with the foreground color. And now I'm going to grab the brush and I'm going to have this at opacity 40 and 40, similar to when we done the highlights for the yellow. So let's go in and grab the brush again and let's just draw in these highlights. So let's come along this arm. Sorry, we want white selected. We're drawing in white because we want to reveal. Let's just click and drag so we can start to see some of these highlights coming in on the woman. Okay, so first of all, I'm just going to do the brighter sort of highlights. Let's just zoom in on the hand so we can see better what we're doing. So we want this top side is all going to be in the bright light. So over here and on the hand. Under here isn't so much. On these fingers there's going to be bright light, and on the bottom side here you want to brush it in. Now I can see here, and again you want to do this with your images, if you see any areas that need improving like this on the layer mask, then you want to come in and do so. So I'm just going to select a black brush at 100% opacity and flow, and I'm just going to draw in here just to remove this sort of black area on the finger. Okay, now we've also want to apply that to the red light layer because that's got the same layer mask, as you can see there, and we're going to do the same here on this finger. Let's undo that. Now on your selection, this is why on your selection, what you actually want to do is be slightly inside the woman, because otherwise you're going to take parts of the background. So let's just do that same for the red, just to make sure there's none of the sort of reddy lights coming through. Okay, much better. So let's come up to our hue and saturation adjustment layer again. We want white, and we're going to set this to around 40. Let's just type that one in, 40 there and 40 on the flow. Let's zoom out slightly. So we've done the hand. Let's turn this off. So this is before and this is after. You can see we've got round up the top here. So let's get the brush going. Let's brush in some more highlights. There'll be more highlights sort of in here, catching on the woman's shoulder. And we actually want to do the face now. So we can do this front bit of the hair. Let's brighten that up. That's going to have some nice highlights there. As you can see around the top. Perfect. And we want to catch the edge of the woman's face as well. On the nose, these areas would naturally be brighter. On this edge of the hair. Again, just come in, and any areas you think should have these highlights, you want to brush them in. So some highlights down here as well. On the edge of this jacket would catch the light. So you can always zoom out to help you see. So let's zoom out to full picture. Now that's looking good. Let's come back in, grab the brush tool again. And again, the way I like to do it, like the other effects, is to kind of have the opacity and flow low on your brush and just build up this effect. So let's come in here. Let's come across the top of the leg now. That's going to have quite bright highlights in just because it's closer to the light source. So across the top of this foot is going to be much brighter. Okay, so let's go in there. Now we would actually have some on the underside of this leg. You can see where some light is coming in, where we adjusted the highlights and shadows before. So maybe you just want to catch the edge, so you can reduce the brush size there and just draw these in down the left side. Let's move up, see how we're looking. I'm just going to do some on the underside of this jacket as well. Maybe not as extreme as that. Let's reduce this down to 20 now. And let's just go with a slightly bigger brush. Slightly bigger brush. We can draw in a bit more subtly across the top here, in the face, and then a bit more subtle on the leg, just to create a nice blend. Okay, so let's zoom out and see the effect. So this is highlights off, this is highlights on. So again, highlights off, highlights back on. Looking good. And this is with the red tones removed and the highlights removed. So this is before, this is after. Now this is with the yellow on as well. So you can start to see how we're building up these effects to better match the lighting in this background. So there you go. That is how you adjust sort of the colors individually to better match the light sources. It's also how you brush in the highlights to match the lighting. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Great effects there. We will move on in the next lesson and continue this edit. Thank you very much for joining me. It's been a pleasure.